If I just quickly glance on my messages, really fucking important. Hi everyone, if you're new to the channel, welcome, my name is Artem, I'm a computational neuroscience student and researcher. Here we explore mental and digital tools to help us study and learn more effectively. But today, I wanted to briefly touch upon the world of productivity and just a tiny bit of neuroscience because it's a very comprehensive topic. Today I would like to talk about attention. We're going to explore what it is, why it matters in learning and in doing work, and we'll also talk about a very important feature of the brain, which makes us generally unable to multitask effectively, despite the common myth. So, without further ado, let's dive straight into it. Attention is the mechanism by which your brain decides which information should have a priority in being processed. Because if you think about it, the brain receives a lot more inputs than it can handle. Sights, sounds, tastes, smells, tactile signals, such as pressure applied by clothing, temperature, touch, pain from all over your body 24/7 several times a second. And on top of that, vestibulary signals, information from internal organs, and self-generated signals from the brain itself, background thoughts, worries, and dreams, unspeakable amount of information. Yet the processing capacity of the cortex is so tiny compared to this. That's why the brain has to have some mechanism of determining which of this information is relevant and which one not so much. That's when attention comes into play. Deep inside the brain there is a structure called the thalamus. Think of it as both a filter and a relay station. Signals from all over the body converge here. Thalamus then either blocks irrelevant information from propagating down into the cortex by inhibiting the corresponding signal, or amplifies what's important and gives it green light to be sent further down the line. It's useful to think of this system as a lighthouse whose beam illuminates attended information. But how does the thalamus decide what's relevant and what's not? It actually receives downstream signals from the cortex itself, which tells this relay station what to attend to. As far as we know, the information from the cortex to the thalamus gets with the help of the middleman, the basal ganglia. But that's just a neurobiological detail, you don't need to worry about that too much. For example, when you are in the classroom, the cortex tells the thalamus, "Dude, we are listening to the lecture on differential equations. It's the first in the semester and really fucking important." So what thalamus does is that it blocks irrelevant signals, such as the feeling of slightly tight pants you happen to wear this morning, or the sound of some douchebag's pen constantly clicking in the background. While visual information, such as to where the teacher is pointing and the sound of his voice, get amplified and make it into the cortex for further processing. Of course, thalamus is not the only attentional system in the body. There is also some form of this lighthouse/filter in higher areas of the cortex, which we haven't identified explicitly, as far as I know, and which also plays a vital role in attention. Because you could be indeed paying attention to what the teacher is saying, or you could be immersed in your own unrelated thoughts. For example, what to order for lunch, or fantasizing about that redhead hottie in the second row. But the analogy of the beam works just as well there. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is that attention is essential for any sort of learning to occur, because it's this gateway which lets the information into the cortex where the learning actually occurs. If you don't pay attention, information just gets stuck at lower stages of processing, and sometimes you're not even consciously aware of it. And so, of course, it's almost impossible to learn anything that way. Paying attention allows the information to move from sensory areas further up into the prefrontal cortex and reverberate there, causing long-term plasticity. That is, the strengthening of connections between the neurons. You may have heard of dopamine, the neuromodulator, which is essential for motivation and the drive to seek novelty. It turns out dopamine is very closely related to attention. It makes intuitive sense because we tend to pay more attention towards something that's new and exciting. The very same dopamine boosts neuronal plasticity, thus enhancing the learning. But this wonderful system has a quirk which makes attention even more valuable and underestimated. You know how people always say you need to stop checking your social media all the time? And it might seem like, what's the big deal? If I just quickly glance on my messages and then revert the beam of attention back to the blackboard, it took milliseconds, right? I didn't miss much information during that time. It's like when you blink, you don't miss out on the movie plot. Let me introduce you to the concept central for effective learning and productivity in general. That is attention residue. Attention residue refers to the effect when you transition from task A to task B, but there still persists a shadow, a mental trace of task A in your cognition and working memory, occupying a portion of available cognitive resources. You can't instantly switch attention between the items. It comes with a price. In the beam analogy, it would correspond to it having an inertia. It takes time and cognitive effort to move it back and forth, which introduces mental friction. This is the main reason why we can't multitask and why we need to eliminate all sorts of distractions during the studying and during the work in general. Switching the context lowers the capacity to think clearly. And so what are the main takeaways? Nowadays there are so many things competing for your attention all over the place. But attention is a limited resource. Shifting it comes with a price. So you need to be extra careful about where to point that attentional beam of yours. In the follow-up video, we'll talk about practical hands-on tips, how you can increase the focus during your study time and thus increase the level and the performance at which you learn, so stay tuned for that. If you like what I do and want to see more of this, consider subscribing to the channel, press the like button, and send this video to your group chats with no context. Goodbye, and thanks for the interest in knowledge.